For those of you, this is the first time here, just know we're having an adult conversation today. How many adults are in the room? You want to put your hand up if you characterize yourself as an adult, okay? Do you have a portion of your brain that you put off and say, okay, this part of my brain, I'm going to make it adult-like, okay? So if you got some child part of your brain, I've got lots. Use your adult side, because we're going to have a tough talk today about one of our favorite subjects, our relationship with money. So that's why I'm calling it an adult conversation. It's a phrase that I borrowed from Reverend Andrea Azevedo down in Bellingham. And she loves using it because it gives you permission, once you say that, to sort of go, okay, yeah, I probably do have some childish issues around money. I probably haven't quite learned a couple of things around money. And maybe they're the practical, how do you balance a checkbook stuff. But maybe more importantly, they're the spiritual principle things. And so that's what we want to talk about today, is what is our relationship with money and what does it actually mean from a spiritual point of view? How do we make this very tangible thing in our world, which especially in Vancouver, where, you know, everybody talks about how high the real estate is and how expensive our rent is, and I can't believe how much they charge me for a box of cereal at Choices, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Money is a what? Try and go through one day, just one day, without having some complaining version conversation with someone about money. It probably comes up in conversations about how much you're getting paid, or how much your rent is, or why you live where you live when you'd rather live somewhere else. Every one of those kinds of conversations are conversations about money. So here is the spiritual principle that we're really working at. And it's no different than what we were talking about with regards to Remembrance Day. The spiritual principle that we're working on is the principle that what we have as appearances is a result of what happened before. So we were just talking about wars, right? So why do you think we have wars? It's because of what we thought before. Those people over there are wrong. I'm right. That person did this. I did this. Now we're at a war. There was a point in almost every single war, and I'm sure this is true throughout our lifetime, when humans could have made a different choice and not had a war. At some point, when you're in an argument with a friend, if you roll it back, there was a point when you could have made a different choice and still negotiated. I'm not saying you don't ignore what's going on, but avoided the argument. It's the same thing with money. At some point, we start to believe what's in front of us. So what happens and what's in front of us, that bank account that we have right now, is a consequence of all the choices that we made up to this point. Could be choices we made around what our education was. Could be choices we made around where we chose to live. Could be choices we made around that inheritance that we decided to totally blow instead of invest it. People do stuff like that all the time, right? We all make choices, and so now we have what is real in front of us, and we believe that it's real. But we get to make a new choice right now. And the bottom line is, we don't actually get to see what that choice is until much later. Much, much later. So my dad, here's a practical way of looking at it. My dad, when I was in my 20s, so math challenged. You have no idea how math challenged I am. So he's trying to explain to me amortization. If you put, or not amortization. See, I can't even get the words right. Jason will help me with this. He'll correct me. So, you put X number of dollars in your bank account, don't touch it, and, interest will accumulate, and you'll be as surprised at how much. But I didn't have enough patience to leave the money in the bank long enough to actually see the demonstration, right? So it's the same thing we do with our lives. We don't wait long enough to see the spiritual demonstration of what we're trying to implant. So I want to tell you a couple of things around what this is. There's a couple of spiritual principles, and I want to give you the comment about, all right, I'm just trying to find it here, that comes from, oh dear, I've lost it. Hang on. It's two quotes that are from Ernest Holmes. So what he says, the first one is, he says, when a problem confronts you, you take it into the silence of your consciousness. So say your problem is finances. Take it into the silence of consciousness, and instead of thinking of the problem, you think of the answer. God does not have problems. Therefore, we don't necessarily have problems. We think we have problems, but if we focus on those, that's what we get more of. Focus on something else, we're going to get more of that. We will change our consciousness as we focus on what it is we want. So I had a really ugly bank account at one point in my life. Like, owed, tons and tons and tons of money. And my saving grace was that I had, done the lovely trick that the banks allow you to do, which is like, oh, you can just borrow against your house, right? So I did that. And then I did it again. And then I did it again. And then I did it again. And before I knew it, I had so much money that I had borrowed against my house that it wasn't even, it was, let's see, I think it was 4 times what I actually earned in a year. How's that for dumb, right? Really, really dumb. So it's going to take a while for me to work on getting myself out of that. But here's what I saw as I started to work on that, was I saw, as I worked on my spiritual principle, as I started to say, I am abundant, and I really started to focus on that, a job showed up that was paying me twice what I was already earning. So not 4 times, wasn't going to solve all my problems quickly, but maybe that was a blessing because clearly I needed to do something different. So the job shows up. Then something else showed up. I can't remember what it was. But the more important thing was that I started to pay attention to every single penny. Every single penny. And then I started to change my consciousness. My awareness about my relationship with money changed. And throughout all of this, the one principle that I kept was that I would tithe. I would give 10% of my income, even though I was in debt, because that was the tricky part. Even though I was in debt, I would give 10% of my income back to my community in some kind of way, back to my spiritual good. In my case, that was the center that I came from. And so that's what I did. And as I did that, I had less to work with, which forced me to become more conscious of what it was that I was working with. And over a period of time, I started to see I had way more money than I realized. Because now, sometimes it's about too many choices. And now I had this many choices I could make. And I became very precious and very mindful and very focused about what those choices were going to be. Were they serving me? Did I need it? Did I just want it? Was it furthering me? And so here's the other side of the story. I ended up leaving the Okanagan. I sold my house, which of course paid off part of that. But in the 3 years prior to that, I paid down 50% of my debt. In the 3 years prior, I reduced my debt by 50%. I didn't even think that that was possible, but I knew that Spirit knew that it was possible. And I kept my mind focused on my principles instead of and I washed my bank account, right? Treat and move your feet. Don't just treat and think it's all airy-fairy out there. We've got to activate our consciousness in our lives. And so here's the most amazing thing. So I come back here, and again, now I've got no job. And I'm thinking, what am I going to do? I have no idea. And so sure enough, a job shows up that pays really, really well. And then 2 months, 3 months later, I was still thinking, I'm not sure, and I was trying to start up a center and trying to keep everything balanced and in good, right order and all the rest of that. And I thought, I have no idea how I'm going to do this because I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back to where I was. And much as I want to build this center and create a center, I am not going to create it with the same consciousness that I created that other thing because I know where that went. I need a new consciousness. I'm going to use this new consciousness now to create this place. So I thought, okay, well, I'll be working for a couple of years then so that I can create that, safety net so that I can do this. And then something arrived in the mail from my previous employer. It was Okanagan College. And I thought, what? I've been gone for 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. I've been gone for quite a while. We've finished up everything. I've filed my taxes, blah, blah, blah. But you know what I had forgotten about? And I didn't even think I was eligible? I had a payout of a pension. Seriously. I hadn't worked there that long. I didn't even know because, you leave at a certain point and you forego that. So I thought I had forgone that and I was okay with that. $20,000 showed up in my bank account. That's what made this center possible. If I hadn't had a consciousness that had paid attention to all of that, chances are my debt would have gone up and I would have still been doing the old thing. And instead, it showed up that way. Yes, if I hadn't started the center, maybe that thing would have still showed up. But Spirit has a really funny way of communicating, is what my experience is. When you get really focused on what happens, things show up. And they show up when you don't expect it. So I want to tell you a different story because it's not just me that these things happen to. So this is a story from Petra Waldes, who is the minister of the center that's in Dallas. So she too uses spiritual principle. This isn't her personal story about her personal finances. This is her story about her center. And she says, twice I've done this with our community in Dallas when I was an interim minister. Each time I was appointed interim minister, we were down to 20 people. They have more than 100 people going right now, maybe even 300. They're a big center now. 20 people and 50,000 and then 30,000 in debt, respectively. 20 people, 50,000 one time, 20,000 a year, 30,000 a year in debt. The board asked me, what were we going to do? And I said, we are going to start tithing immediately. The tithe was held as a bill, back due about 5 to 6 months each time. First, we erased it from our liabilities, and then every Monday we counted Sunday's offering and sent 10% off to home office. That's what they did. And the spiritual principle around tithing, I just want to explain that. And this isn't a big thing around, I'm just telling you what the spiritual principle is. We give before we receive. Do you want to believe that the bank account is in charge of your good, or do you want to believe Spirit is in charge of your good? That's what the principle is. So by giving first, not afterwards, not like you give 10% after you've paid all your debts and then you cut the check. Do it first, because that's setting up and trust that I have faith and I trust and I know that Spirit supports me. That's where I get my good. If we believe that money supports us, that's a false god. If we believe that our best friend supports us, that's a false god. If we believe our parents support us, that's a false god. If we believe our job supports us, that's a false god. What supports us is Spirit. And how we demonstrate to Spirit that that is what we believe is we tithe or give away first. And then the rest is for us to do whatever we choose to do. And it expands. And you don't know that it will do this until you practice it. So it is a leap of faith. It is a leap of faith. And yes, it is a scary leap of faith. It's not for the faint at heart, really. So I'm going to tell you the rest. So the board was scared. Who isn't when you do this stuff? We don't have any money. You're asking me to give away 10%. We got 20 people here. And you're saying we're going to give 10% away to some home office in Colorado that doesn't even really care about us or really know who we are? Yeah, we're going to do that. Because we're putting our principles into practice. We need to prove the principle to ourselves so that we actually know that it works. Otherwise, it's just an idea. They're a dime a dozen, right? So she says, I was not scared because I understand and know how to use the law. In 5 to 6 months, respectively, we'd paid off all debts owed and were running in the black. Twice they did this. Twice. The board asked, how did that happen? And she says it was by using the law and acting on faith. And then she also says, now we didn't spend any money on other things until we were out of debt. That's the real world. It's not about pretending there's no real world. It's not about making those other hard decisions. But where are you putting your principle? Where are you putting your principle? So tithing is different from spending. Tithing is sending that signal out to the universe. And it gets us, and it should be uncomfortable. If you tithe 5%, you're not actually making yourself uncomfortable enough. Because you know what? That's kind of easy. You got to push the envelope. So if you try 5% and that feels uncomfortable, once you get comfy with it, try 6%. People do the opposite, and it works just as well with creating wealth. We had a conversation yesterday about ceiling. Oh, you know, we all have a weird ceiling around how much money we actually think we can earn. And somebody said to me once, why don't you change your ceiling? Just change your idea about what you think you can earn. What would that do? What if you just said, I want a 6-figure income? Well, now you've put that into consciousness. And so let's start creating that. That's also doing principle. So they're both sides of the same equation. These are how we start to change our relationship with money, how we start to change our experience, and how we start to have a spiritual relationship with ourselves and with money and embed that as a spiritual practice. So I'm going to give you one more quote from Ernest Holmes on this. And he says, in our ignorance of the truth, we have misused the highest power we possess. And so great is this power, so complete is our freedom in it, so absolute the domain of law through it, that the misuse of this power has brought upon us the very conditions from which we suffer. It was no one else's fault that I was in my crazy little debt situation. That wasn't anybody else's fault. In fact, there were people around me who were doing everything they could by giving me more money, helping me out. I was still doing it. It was my fault. It was mine to fix, mine to deal with, mine to do. And so that's where the adult conversation is, right? Is trying to figure out where are those spiritual principles? Where are they in our lives? If we say spirit is everywhere, it's everywhere except our bank account? That's interesting. No, it's everywhere. Everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. So take a look. See what kind of relationship you want to have. See how much you want to expand it in both ways. See where you need to pull back and where you want to grow. And start putting those ideas into your conscious practice, in your treatment work, in your affirmation work, in all of those things, and you will start to see a shift. I absolutely promise you, you will see a shift. It's a principle, a law. Thank you so much.